The ghost in the school. The wind howled through the trees, as if trying to warn them, but the group of teenagers barely noticed. Their eyes were fixed on the looming silhouette in the distance, an old, crumbling school that had long been abandoned. For years, it had stood silent, a dark shadow over the small town of Thornwood. Locals whispered about its past, about the strange disappearances and unsolved murders that had plagued its halls. But none of that deterred Alex, Sarah, Noah, and Ella. They were on a mission. A dare, really. To uncover the truth. To face whatever secrets lay hidden behind those decaying walls. They had heard the stories. How the school had been built in the late 19th century, how it had once been a place of promise, only to become a house of horrors. The rumors spoke of a series of mysterious deaths, the kind that no one could explain. And then, as suddenly as it all began, the school was shut down. No one had set foot inside for years. But tonight, that would change. The air was thick with tension as they approached the school's rusted gates. The iron fence, long since bent and broken, creaked in protest as they pushed it open. Alex, ever the leader, was the first to step through. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from excitement. This was what they had come for. The unknown. The thrill of discovery. "Ready for this?" he asked, turning to his friends. Noah, the most cautious of the group, hesitated. His hands were trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it. "I don't know, man. This place, it's giving me the creeps." Sarah, the daredevil of the group, rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. It's just an old school. Nothing's gonna happen." Ella, the quiet one, said nothing. She was already walking toward the building, drawn to it by some invisible force. She had always been the one to feel things the others couldn't. The whispers in the wind. The cold chill that seemed to follow her wherever she went. As they entered the building, the darkness swallowed them whole. The only light came from the faint glow of their flashlights, casting eerie shadows on the cracked walls. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The floorboards creaked under their weight, groaning as if protesting their intrusion. They moved deeper into the school, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and broken windows let in the cold, damp night air. It felt as though time had stopped here, the school frozen in a moment of despair. Alex led the way, his flashlight beam sweeping across the darkened hallways. "We need to find the old gymnasium," he said, his voice low. That's where it all started. They had heard the stories about the gym, how it had been the scene of the first strange death, and how the spirits of the victims were said to haunt the place. But none of them were ready for what they would find when they finally reached it. The gymnasium doors were slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. As they pushed them open, a chill ran down their spines. The room was vast and empty, the once polished wooden floors now covered in dust and debris. But there was something else. A presence. It was as if the air itself was charged with something dark, something angry. "Something's wrong," Noah whispered, his voice trembling. "I feel like we're not alone." They all stood still, listening. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the sound of their breathing and the faint rustle of wind outside. But then, a noise. A soft, shuffling sound coming from the far corner of the gym. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could respond, the light from their flashlights flickered, casting strange, fleeting shadows across the room. The air grew colder, and the hair on the back of their necks stood on end. A low moan echoed through the gym, sending a wave of unease through the group. "Maybe we should go," Ella said quietly, her eyes wide with fear. But it was too late. The door behind them slammed shut with a deafening crash. Panic set in as the room seemed to close in around them. The temperature dropped further, and the shadows seemed to shift, swirling in the corners of their vision. The moaning grew louder, closer. And then, as if on cue, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was a woman, her face obscured by long, tangled hair. She stood motionless, staring at them with empty eyes. Her clothes were old, torn, stained with something that looked like blood. "Who are you?" Sarah shouted, her voice shaking. The woman didn't answer. She simply stepped forward, her feet making no sound on the floor. And then, as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. The room fell silent once more, but the tension remained. The group stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Had it been real? Or had their minds played a trick on them? Alex was the first to break the silence. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice urgent. But as they turned to leave, they found the door was no longer there. The gymnasium was now a maze, and they were trapped. The air in the gymnasium grew thick with a palpable sense of dread. The room felt alive, its very walls whispering secrets, secrets that were better left unheard. Alex's heart raced, the cold sweat on his skin turning to ice. He tugged at the door, the handle rattling, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged in his chest as his friends fumbled around him, trying desperately to find another way out. But there was no escape. The gym was no longer a space of familiar dimensions, it had transformed into something unnatural, something that defied reason. "Is this some kind of joke?" Noah's voice cracked as he paced back and forth, his eyes wide with disbelief. "This isn't funny, Alex." Alex's pulse thudded in his ears. "I swear I didn't lock the door. We're not trapped. This has to be some trick." But deep down, he knew. There was no trick. No logical explanation for the terror that gripped them. The gymnasium had become a maze. Every time they tried to move, it seemed the walls shifted, the hallways twisted into endless corridors, and the door they had just come through had vanished, replaced by an unbroken stretch of cracked tiles. Ella, who had been silent until now, her face pale as ghostly mist, stepped forward slowly. We need to find the source." "It's the only way," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the oppressive silence. Alex turned to her, a mix of confusion and disbelief on his face. "The source?" he asked. "The source of the darkness," she said softly, as though speaking to herself. "Whatever's trapping us, it's alive. It feeds off fear." Noah scoffed, shaking his head. "That's insane. There's no way." "Do you have a better idea?" Ella interrupted, her eyes hardening. "Because if we don't figure this out, we won't get out at all." The wind outside howled again, a mournful wail that seemed to pierce the very walls of the school. It wasn't natural. It felt like something was calling to them, something far darker than the old structure around them. The entire building seemed to breathe, to move with a life of its own, and the floor beneath their feet creaked with every step. Sarah, her courage cracking, backed away. I think I saw something," she whispered. Her voice quivered, but her eyes were wide with terror. Back there, by the old basketball court, a figure. A woman. Alex shot her a sharp look. "It's not real, Sarah. Whatever you saw, it wasn't real." But even as he said it, a cold dread settled in his gut. He had seen something, too. The flash of a figure, long hair hanging in front of its face, an ethereal glow that had seemed to flicker in and out of existence. It wasn't real, but it was. It was real to them. "Let's find that basketball court," Ella said, her voice low, resolute. "We might find the truth there." The group moved cautiously down one of the many hallways. Their flashlights barely cut through the oppressive darkness, casting long, jagged shadows that stretched unnaturally across the walls. Every now and then, a distant creak or a soft thud echoed in the silence, but they couldn't tell if it was just the building settling, or something else. It wasn't long before they found the basketball court. It was empty, save for the worn-out hoops and the dust-covered floor. The bleachers had long since rotted away, their metal supports rusted and creaking under the weight of time. But the strangest thing was the air. It was heavy, as though something ancient had been sealed within the room, waiting for the right moment to awaken. As they stepped inside, the floor seemed to groan in protest, echoing throughout the vast space. The faint sound of whispering voices filled the air, low and almost unintelligible. But the words weren't meant to be understood, only to fill the mind with unease. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the far corner of the court. It was the same woman, her hair wild and untamed, her eyes hollow, empty. She stood motionless, her back turned to them, as if she didn't even acknowledge their presence. "No!" Sarah gasped, stepping back. "It's her again." "Stay calm," Alex urged, though his voice was strained. "It's just a hallucination, just a trick of the mind." But even as he spoke, the woman began to turn, her head snapping around with unnatural speed. Her eyes were black, empty voids that seemed to suck in the light around her. Her mouth twisted into a grin, wide and predatory. "She's not real," Alex repeated, but there was a tremor in his voice now. The woman's lips parted, her voice a low rasp that seemed to reverberate through their bones. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, each word dragging across the air like a fingernail on glass. "You should have left. But now you're mine." Before they could react, the woman lunged at them, her movements impossibly fast, her hands reaching out like claws. But just as suddenly, she disappeared into the air, vanishing in a gust of cold wind that rattled the broken windows. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the whispers returned, louder now, filling the room like an army of unseen voices. "Get out!" Noah shouted, his face twisted in fear. "Get out now!" But they couldn't move. It was as if the very air around them had thickened, binding them in place. Their breaths were shallow, hearts hammering in their chests as they realized the truth: they weren't alone. Not by a long shot. Ella, her face pale, her eyes wide with horror, reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn notebook. She flipped it open to a page filled with strange symbols and cryptic notes. "We need to perform the ritual," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to banish whatever's in this place." But before she could continue, the lights flickered once more, and the temperature plummeted. The shadows grew longer, darker, more alive. And then, as if the skull itself had come alive with fury, the walls began to groan. The ceiling cracked. A loud, guttural growl vibrated through the floor, shaking the very foundation of the building. "No!" Alex screamed, grabbing Ella's arm. "We can't stay here!" But the gymnasium door slammed shut again, and this time it was sealed tight. They were trapped. The darkness was closing in, suffocating them. The cold seemed to freeze time itself. Every breath Alex took felt like a jagged shard of ice slicing through his chest. He couldn't understand it. How had the building transformed into something so alive, so insidious? The walls, once solid and still, now seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, as if the very structure of the school was fighting to keep them trapped. The growling from below, deep within the earth, reverberated through their bones. And above them, the ceiling trembled, as if something, or someone, was moving in the dark. "No!" Sarah cried out, clutching her arms, trying to warm herself from the biting cold that was beginning to settle in her bones. "We can't stay here. This isn't just a haunted school, it's something else." Alex looked frantically around the room. The shadows weren't just shadows anymore. They were stretching, reaching, and shifting as if they were searching for something, or someone. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what they were facing. The stories, the rumors, the warnings, all of it had felt like an urban legend before. But now, as the shadows closed in, he knew that the legends were more than just stories. They were warnings. "Listen to me," Ella said, her voice trembling but sharp with urgency. "The only way out is to confront whatever this is. We need to finish what we started. The ritual, it might be the only way." Noah's face turned pale, his hands shaking. "Ritual? Are you serious? What if it makes things worse?" "I don't know," Ella whispered, her fingers brushing over the pages of the ancient notebook she had found in her bag. "But it's our only chance. We have to stop it before it consumes us." before it consumes all of us. The whispers began again, louder this time, echoing from every corner of the gym. It was as if the walls themselves were speaking, their voices low, mocking, and filled with the promise of terror. You should never have come. You should never have stayed. A cold gust of wind slammed against them, snuffing out their flashlights, plunging them into darkness. Panic surged in Alex's chest as he reached out for his friends, but his hands found nothing. His breath came in shallow gasps, and the world around him began to distort. The voices became clearer now, louder, as if they were circling around him, feeding off his fear. He could almost hear them whispering his name. Alex. His heart hammered in his chest, his throat tight. He couldn't breathe. Sarah? Noah? Ella? His voice cracked, but it was swallowed by the darkness. And then, in a suffocating silence, a single whisper pierced through the chaos. Help me. It was a voice, soft, feminine, filled with desperation. Alex froze. It was the same voice he had heard in the corner of the gym, the voice of the woman they had seen earlier. The woman with the hollow eyes. She was speaking to him. But this time, her words were different. They weren't filled with rage or malice. There was something else. Help me. But was it a plea for mercy, or was it a trap? Where is she? Noah's voice, shaky with fear, broke through the darkness. I can't see anything. I'm here, Ella said softly, as though she was speaking to the shadows themselves. We need to listen to her. It's not just the woman. It's the school. It's feeding off us. The more we fear it, the stronger it gets. Suddenly, the flashlight in Noah's hand flickered to life, casting an eerie glow on the room. The shadows receded slightly, but only enough to reveal the figure of the woman, standing motionless by the far wall. Her eyes, still hollow, fixed on them, unblinking. Her mouth opened slowly, as though the words she had spoken earlier were now caught in her throat. Please. She whispered again, the plea unmistakable. Help me. But before anyone could speak, the temperature dropped sharply. Alex felt his breath form clouds of frost in the air. His limbs went numb with the cold, and the gymnasium seemed to shrink around them, its walls pressing in tighter, closer. The ceiling seemed to close in on them. The lights flickered once again, revealing the woman's full form, a contorted, unnatural silhouette, before they blinked out entirely. Is she real? Noah gasped, his voice cracking. I don't understand. How can she be real? Alex's heart raced, a wave of nausea sweeping over him. The woman's presence, though fleeting, felt too real to ignore. But what did it all mean? Was she a victim? Or was she something far more dangerous? The whisper had been so soft, so sincere. He didn't know what to believe anymore. Then, the air shifted, and a cold hand brushed against his shoulder. It wasn't Noah. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't Ella. Get away from me! Alex yelled, spinning around, his heart in his throat. But no one was there. No one. Just the darkness, pressing in from every angle. The whispers began again, now louder, almost deafening. It's too late. You've already joined us. A burst of light suddenly flared from the flashlight in Sarah's hand, revealing a message scrawled on the far wall of the gymnasium in a language none of them understood. The letters were twisted, jagged, but the meaning was clear. Whatever had lived here before them was not ready to let them leave. Do you see that? Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. It's a warning. I don't care, Alex snapped, grabbing her wrist and pulling her away from the wall. We have to get out of here. We're not doing this anymore. Whatever this place is, whatever she is, it's not worth it. But as he turned toward the door, the floor buckled beneath him. The gymnasium seemed to rise up around him like a living creature, its walls contorting, its shadows stretching to swallow him whole. He stumbled backward, and just as quickly, the woman was there again. She moved with inhuman speed, her cold hands grabbing his arm. "You can't leave. You belong to me now." Alex's breath caught in his throat. He tried to scream, but no sound came. The darkness closed in on him, and in the last moments before everything went black, he heard the woman's voice one final time, her whisper seeping into his mind like poison. "I told you, you should have left."